Hello guys, in this video I'm going to try to explain to you a bit about how I think that IB thinks when they ask specific exam questions. So hopefully this will be some useful advice on how to answer IB biology exam questions. And I'm going to base this screencast on some of the questions that were in the human physiology test and also some of the questions that are in the upcoming ecology hand-in. Yeah, so let's get started on this. I have to make the PowerPoint work. Here we go. So I'm going to talk you through some of the questions that were in the human physiology hand-in, and we'll start with some of the multiple choice questions, because when it comes to multiple choice questions, the thing is that when you look at the 4 different options that you have, then some of them are not completely wrong, and there is usually at least 2 that could be right. But then some of them are just more correct than others, right? So in this case, it says, where does gas exchange occur in the lungs? And then it could be type 1 pneumocytes in the bronchioles, in the veins surrounding the alveoli, or in the surfactants. And surfactants are sort of in the right place, right? The veins wrapped around the alveoli, yeah, are involved in gas exchange. Bronchioles, not so much, because we have to be in the alveoli for gas exchange to take place. And the type 1 pneumocytes are actually the cells that are directly involved in gas exchange, right? So even though, so this answer is not entirely wrong, but it's just not what IB wants. It's just not the most correct out of those 4 possible answers, right? And the way you figure out what IB wants you to know is to use the guide, right? Because if you look at the gas exchange subtopic, it says here, as part of the understandings, type 1 pneumocytes are extremely thin alveolar cells that are adapted to carry out gas exchange. So they want you to know that it's the type 1 pneumocytes that are directly involved in gas exchange, which is why the correct answer in this case is A. And then if we move on to the next one, again, this is an example of how IB tries to trick you, right? Because this is, of course, a diagram of the female reproductive system with the uterus and all that, fallopian tubes, and then you have the ovaries out here. And you all know that ovaries produce eggs, right? So many of you have chosen the answer that it has something to do with the egg cells. But correct answer in this case is that they produce the hormones estrogen and progesterone. So how do you know that they don't produce, that this is not correct? That's because the eggs produced out here are not yet fertilized. So fertilization would take place somewhere around here in the middle of the fallopian tube, right? So again, some of them are close to being correct, but not completely correct, and you have to go with the most correct one to earn the mark. And then when it comes to some of the short answer and extended response questions, so here is an example, right? So it says here, describe the processes involved in absorbing different nutrients across the cell membrane of villous epithelium cells lining the small intestine. And much of the stuff that is mentioned by the student in this answer is not wrong, right? So it's correct that there is a thin wall. It's correct that there's active transport and simple diffusion and stuff like that, right? But many of you would see when after the summer break that you get this back, that I have stated a number of times that your answer is not precise enough. So why is this answer not good enough? Well, if we take a look at the guide, it says here that one of the understandings is different methods of membrane transport are required to absorb different nutrients. And if we then look at the question again, it says processes involved in absorbing different nutrients across the cell membrane. Yeah, so what they want you to state is more specifically not about all the adaptation, the thin walls, the all that, but it's the precise processes involved when it comes to different nutrients. So which nutrients are taken up by active transport, which are taken up by simple diffusion, which are taken up by facilitated diffusion, and what sort of defines those different modes of transport. That's what they want in this answer. And again, another example here, discuss the control of blood glucose level, and a very long, in many ways, nice response to this question. So what you, and then I just wanted to use this to show you how I mark these questions, right? So the mark scheme for this one looks like this, right? So again, and sometimes the guide is not really enough or specific enough for us to figure out exactly what it is IB wants you to know. So sometimes you also have to look at old exam questions, and this is an example of this. So what do they want you to know? They want you to know about what homeostasis actually mean, and they want you to know that these two hormones are produced in the pancreas, and they also want you to know that glucose is produced in beta cells, and glucagon is produced in alpha cells. And then they want you to know that insulin is released when the blood glucose level is high, and that causes the absorption of glucose, and the excess glucose can then be stored in the liver in the form of glycogen, which is a polysaccharide. And that glucagon is then, the hormone glucagon is then released when the blood glucose level becomes too low, and that causes the breakdown of glucagon stored in the liver, and it can then be released as glucose into the bloodstream, and that would raise the blood sugar level again. And then the second sort of part of the question has to do with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and what can causes and consequences. So a little bit about how it can be treated. That type 1 diabetics, they would have to inject themselves with insulin, and type 2 diabetes can often be controlled by diet and exercise. Yeah, and here you can see, so again, like I said before, this is an example of how the guide is not always precise enough for us to really figure out what it is IB wants, because it's what it says here is insulin and glucagon are secreted by beta and alpha cells of the pancreas respectively to control blood glucose concentration. So behind this sentence here is the fact that you should know where insulin is produced, where glucagon is produced, and the role that both of them play in regulated. So what is secreted when the blood glucose level is high, and what is secreted when the blood glucose level is low. Yeah, and then down here in application, causes and treatment of type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So what can cause this, and how can it be treated, both of these types of diabetes? Yes. Yeah, so that was just a very brief sum up of some of the questions from the last hand-in, and then this question comes from the next hand-in, and you will see the same pattern again. So they will try to trick you, right? So here is an example. Animals in the highest trophic level of a food chain will often be the largest in body size, but will be few in numbers. What accounts for the small numbers? And then there is a number of possibilities. I can tell you that C is wrong, but if I didn't tell you, I imagine that some of you would perhaps answer C, right? Because if you just read through it quickly, it has to do, well, there's something about heat, something about chemical energy, blah, blah, blah. That might be right. You've heard about that in relation to something about food change and energy loss, right? But the reason this is wrong is because it's not heat that's converted into chemical energy, it's the other way around, right? So they will, yeah, again, they will try to trick you. So take a really close look at these and figure out which one is the most accurate one, which is the most correct one. And a second example of this, which statement describes the term species? So again, if you take a look, then answer C is not completely wrong. Organisms of the same type in a population, yeah, they would be the same species, right? But this is not the correct answer. There's one that's more correct than this one. So again, read them carefully and pick the one that is more correct than the others. And then I also just want to mention to you that some of the questions in this handout sort of span across more than just one topic. So in this one we're back in molecular biology and a little bit about cellular respiration and respirometers and how they can be used to measure oxygen consumption. So in this handout, you also need to go back a bit and revise a bit and use knowledge from other topics. And this is what it will be like at an actual exam. The questions would also go across different topics. So I just wanted to mention that to you. And then another example of why it's important that when you study IB biology that you use the guide, because here is a question that says outline the role of fungi in nutrient cycling. Well, what do you need to know about fungi? And if you then look at the understandings for this subtopic, they don't specifically mention fungi. So you would need to know a bit about fungi. You would need to know that there are saprotrophs and what defines a saprotroph. And you would then again also need to draw on this down here that the supply of inorganic nutrients is maintained by nutrient cycling. So these two understandings is what they want you to show. They want you to show that you understand this, that what a saprotroph is and what it does, and also that you understand that the breakdown of organic matter is important, because otherwise we wouldn't sort of the inorganic nutrients wouldn't be released and couldn't be recycled in the ecosystem. So yeah. And then there's this one. Distinguish between the exchange of matter and energy with the surroundings in a closed mesocosm. And you have actually produced a closed mesocosm, the one in the plastic containers that you have set up, the sealed ecosystems. So you can take a look at that and maybe think about how is matter exchanged inside that system, or is matter exchanged with the surrounding, and is energy exchanged with the surroundings. And if you then again use the guide, and this time we have to go down into the section that's called guidance, where they sometimes elaborate a little bit on what it is that you need to know. It says something about here that mesocosms can be set up in glass vessels because entry and exit of matter can be prevented, but light can enter and heat can leave. So you actually have the answer down here already, right? So again, it's important to use the guide. And again, for the last question in this handing, explain the movement of energy and inorganic nutrients in the ecosystem. This question spans two subtopics, so there you will have to draw both of the understandings from the first subtopic of ecology and then the second, which has to do with the energy flow. But again, if you read what it is IB wants you to know about this, you can more or less take some of these statements, rewrite them a little bit, and then you would actually have the answer to this question, right? Yeah. And I think that was my last slide. It was. Yeah, I'll just go back to this one. So, yeah. So I want you to use this information that I just gave you when you answer the next hand-in. And we'll talk about this in the class that we have Friday. So this little screencast will be homework, and then we'll meet and talk a bit more about it when in Teams on Friday. Bye for now.